Listen to the All in My Head podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Please, allow me to show you something.
Welcome back to the All in My Head podcast. I'm Jenny, and I am your host. And today, we're stepping into a place we don't often want to visit, but all of us carry inside: the space of grief. This episode is called Where Grief Lives. And grief isn't just about losing someone we love. That is the most common type of grief we talk about. But grief is the quiet ache of a friendship that has faded, the shadow of a dream that didn't happen, relationships that ended without closure. There's this grand myth that if you chose this type of boundary or ending of a relationship, you don't get to grieve it. And that is so far from true. Grief, even in a choice you made, is valid and necessary. And in a past episode that I did with Reggie Hubbard, we talked about grief and grief of people who haven't passed and how that is a form of grief that often gets overlooked. And so I wanted to just start briefly with that intro that is a different type of grief, but it's a feeling of grief that needs to be honored and that is valid. So honor that if that's the type of grief that you're in the midst of. If you are grieving a relationship of a person who is still living that you don't have a relationship with, or that a friendship that's faded, or whatever season you're coming through, honor that for a moment. Grief lives in the corners of our lives that we sometimes pretend to not even see, but it's always there, and it's just waiting for us to notice it. This past year in particular was a year in July that we had been grieving the loss of my father-in-law. And I've lost so many people over the past 52 years of my life, some close friends and family members, and I've grieved them deeply. You know, I'm a deep feeling person, and I've gone through that type of grief and mourned them. But this loss was so different. It's the type of loss that no one can prepare you for. And I actually wrote a brief story that I started writing after the loss of my father-in-law. And it's called Nobody Prepares You for the Loss of a Parent. And it's over on my blog on WordPress. And that's where you can find it if you want to read the full blog post. It's on everythingI'veWantedToBe.wordpress.com. And I talk about those first moments in which we got the phone call that Dad had passed. My husband had flown back home to Connecticut to spend the day with him because we knew it was coming any day at that point. And he wanted to just be there for a brief period of time with him. And he was home. He had gotten home earlier that evening, and he got the phone call from his mother. And that phone call changed everything. It changed his whole life. Everything was suddenly completely different in that moment. And from that moment forward, it was different for him, for his siblings, for my mother-in-law, who had lost her spouse of over 60 years, for our kids, for his other grandchildren, for his great-grandchildren. And it was really honestly something that we couldn't wrap our minds around. My husband's first words after he hung up the phone were, "I'm halfway to being an orphan." And that gutted me to my core. How do I even try to console him? I couldn't. I mean, I honestly had no words. And so we just lay there, holding each other, crying until we fell asleep from pure and utter exhaustion. When grief breaks you open like that, you let it in and you wade in the spaces between love and loss. The days and the weeks to follow were an absolute blur. It was a blur of planning flights and drive times back to Connecticut and all that goes into saying your final goodbyes and honoring your loved one. And it was strange. It was like living in this alternate reality. And my biggest priority during that time was, especially once I got to Connecticut, was to be present in every way and to hold my husband, my 3 sons, and my mother-in-law's heart in any way that I could. And I hope that's what I did, because it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. He was so beautifully honored. My mother-in-law made sure that every detail was perfect for him. She's so wonderful in that way. She honored everything he would have wanted and everything he had requested. And it was beautiful. But it's strange when you stop to think about loss and about losing someone, that you'll never hear that person's voice again, or hug them, or share news with them. And there have been so many days where we said and we say that Dad would have loved that. He would have loved this experience that we're having, or this season that we're in, or whatever we're going through. And we know he would have. But we also know that he is divinely guiding things for all of us, that he's watching over us all. And honestly, we feel his presence every day. I guess I would say that the hardest part of grieving is the grieving. Because grieving isn't something that just ends. It's something that takes up residence in your being. And grief changes over time. It doesn't get easier. So anyone who says that, I would argue that that's not true. It doesn't get easier. It just shifts from something that is sharp and pointy and unbearable to something that's softer and quieter, but still ever present. Grief is a room in the house of our hearts. And some days that door is closed, and other days you just find yourself sitting in it. It's the echoes of what's gone. And some days it's just the name, it's just the ache that you cannot name. So be gentle with yourself as you grieve. And grief shows up in the most unexpected moments, right? You could be having the best day. You could be doing the things that you love. You could be out in nature. You could be with your loved ones, and you could hear a song and it takes you back into that space of grief. You could smell a certain meal or a certain scent. That's been happening to me a lot lately. I have been drinking a cup of coffee that was amaretto flavored, and I could vividly see and hear a person from over 30 years ago in my life who had passed. It brings you right back to this core memory with a person who you've loved and lost. Or you could be passing by a place and it jogs a memory for you. I would say honor those moments. Honor those moments as the memory of the person that you've loved and lost, and that you still love, because love doesn't go away. Think about where love has taken you, the love of this person, the love for this person. Think about what that has contributed to your life. And where does grief live in you? Is it a photo that's tucked away in a drawer in the silence of your mornings? Or maybe in the way you hold your breath when you hear someone's laugh that reminds you of the person that you miss? How beautiful to be able to have that. That grief can be beautiful if we think of it in that way. And people talk about moving on. That is such a weird thing to say. I mean, I think about that phrase often, especially since the loss of my father-in-law. And I can't imagine how many times people have said that to my mother-in-law. I mean, she lost her husband. So to say you will move on, it'll get better, I don't think so. I don't think you move on. I think that grief just becomes a part of who you are. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it has to harden you. I just think that that's the reality, that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You'll learn to live with it. The grief will change. The grief will soften. But you won't move on and you won't get over it. And you shouldn't. You know, we have to hold space for sorrow because grief is the expression of how much we loved someone and the impact that they had on our lives. I've talked about this in episodes past. I'm a crier. I'm an empath. I'm someone who has all the feelings. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think crying is important. I think feeling our feelings is important. But I love this quote by Shakespeare. To weep is to make less the depth of grief. To weep is to make less the depth of grief. I think that's so true. I think it's cleansing. Crying is just the external expression of grief, and it helps to cry. It's necessary. It's cathartic. It's a release. And I also think it's important to carry out your grief in a meaningful way. Is there a way that you could honor this person through storytelling or through art or through a ritual or just having conversations about them? We planted a tree in Dad's memory shortly after he passed, and it's in this state forest in the hills of Georgia. And I love waking up and knowing that there's this beautiful tree that's growing, and it's growing from the love that we all have and had for someone who was so important in our lives. And hopefully we can take a drive out soon to that forest and just take it all in. I have talked about this as well. I personally find myself journaling more, and that's an expression for me of how I can cope with situations and times and thoughts and things that are happening. And I have found myself more writing down memories and stories from the past. Our youngest son, Bennett, has been asking us all for our favorite memories with Poppy, and we've been sharing those, and that kind of opened up a bigger conversation and bigger times where we find ourselves doing that just while we're sitting around at home. My husband and I will talk about him more, or he might just laugh out of nowhere about something, and it strikes up a conversation about a memory of him from the past. And we also find ourselves making his favorite meals or eating something that he loved and talking about him as much as possible and just honoring him in those small ways often. And I think that's important. I think that's how we carry the legacy forward of our loved ones. You know, if we talk about them, they won't be forgotten. And that's beautiful that we're able to have that to share and to pass on with our children, and for them to pass it along to their children, and so on. And I have personally found myself more and more celebrating other loved ones who have passed in a quiet, but still a very meaningful way. I might drink a particular type of coffee and sit and honor my Leaves and Pages chosen brother Donnie. Or I might be jamming to some Spanish or Latin freestyle music, and that reminds me of my sweet sis Lulu. And I've been making more recipes of people that I love and miss. I find myself making recipes of my aunt Titi Iris or a dear family friend, Anna, who was kind of like a pseudo grandmother to us since our grandmother wasn't here locally close to us. And I might make her Italian cookies, which I would probably only make at Christmas time before. And now I find myself making them more often to have that moment, or the biscottis that she used to make. And food has been comforting in that way because we can sit and we can talk about these loved ones over one of their favorite meals or their favorite dishes or a dessert that they loved. And we can remember those times that we got to share together. And that's beautiful. I find myself also going through photos and sharing them with my kids or on social media. It's beautiful to be able to have those memories that pop up or, you see in passing on your social media page, and you can share that and people can have their own moment to reflect and to remember. And I find myself taking pictures out and placing them around so that I can look at them every day. Grief isn't an intruder. It's proof of love, of hope, and of deep living. Where grief lives, love once lived and still does. So where does grief live? Right? That's the title of this episode, Where Grief Lives. Grief lives everywhere, in the heart, in memory, in the smallest moments that catch us off guard. But it doesn't only live in pain. It lives in beauty too. In the stories we share, in the ways we remember, in the ways we continue to love, even in absence. I want to take a moment to encourage all of you that if you feel called to take 5 minutes after this episode and write down the places that grief lives in you, not as something to fix. Because you grieve doesn't make you broken. It's not something to fix, but as something to recognize and to honor. Thank you for being here with me, for sitting in this tender place, and for listening to All in My Head. I appreciate every single one of you for taking time and spending it with me. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself and the places where grief lives.
Let's go.
Hey friends, if you've been loving the conversations we have here on the All in My Head podcast and you're looking for a way to ground your thoughts, reflect more deeply, or just make space for yourself in the chaos, I've created something for you. My very own journals are now available on Amazon. Whether it's the gratitude journal to help you focus on the good, especially on the hard days, or the Mind Unwind journal, a space to release, reset, and realign, these were made with you in mind, my thoughtful, deep-feeling, always reflecting listeners. Just head to Amazon and search Gratitude, Mind Unwind Journal, or my name, Jenny Jimenez-Sullivan, or check the link in the show notes to grab your copy. It's simple, intentional, and ready to meet you wherever you are.